I'll talk directly to you. Um, and thank you, Dr. Ellis, for having me here. And finding you is a treasure. I have to tell you that. And I said it to you before, and I say it to you now. Just a treasure. Just to know the people who are out there putting in the work, and that's always the key. Who's putting in the work? So, and Stella, I hope that you continue to do exactly what you're doing to avoiding the political traps that a lot of people want to draw us into around climate change. It's a dangerous trap at a time when all shoulders need to be at the wheel. So don't fall into the political trap. It's crazy. Um, I have a bit of a unique position, and I'd love to hear back from our people who are listening all over the country, which is great, tuned in. I have a kind of a unique perspective. Well, it's unique in the sense that it's a little off the beaten path. Our organization, Universal Basic Resources, is focused on the idea that, well, we're concerned that the systems, the political systems, particularly on the federal level, is really super compromised in order for us to do some really effective and immediate climate change action. That's kind of our perspective. It doesn't mean that work can't be done on a local level or even on a regional basis, but we do know on a federal level, as much as we'd like to see more action, and there are some senators and Congress people who are really putting in the work, we just think that because of the immediacy of the crisis, that the political resolution to the challenge is not enough. I think that it can work in combination, but I do believe that private, community-based kinds of action, networked, is much more effective than anything that we can get from Congress, or from the president for that matter. It's just the level of change that we need to go through right now, and I mean right now, in order for us to be effective in the next few years, requires more community-based actions. So we're pushing a lot of community-based things, and we have a prototype that we're putting together here in the Denver metropolitan area that we plan on scaling at some point. And I'd love to talk to some of you out there in your communities and what you're doing. Everybody's doing some really great work, quite frankly, in their communities. The most important thing is that we want to make sure that all of our actions are networked so that we're able to share ideas, share our experiences, and continue to become stronger as a group. So that's our big foundational idea, is that we're running out of time. We've actually run out of time. So we're really we're in arrears now. So we really have to kind of push forward, and that's going to require community action and network communities, because the communities can't do this work in and of themselves. We just don't have the resources, community by community, but network communities makes an incredible difference. And that's why I'm working with the Community Development Society and some other community-based organizations so that we can work through them. Anyway, let me share with you some of the main points of my new book entitled You and the New Normal. There's a new book we just released, myself and Dr. Mohammed Bouheji, and it's based around the idea that we started seeing these things happening that we're experiencing now, especially here in the States, years ago. And one of the things that we kept saying, this was me last year about this time, was that because of the scale of the crises that are coming down the pipe, the big challenge that we'll face as a country, and then eventually as a global community, is the fact that we're not ready for crises of scale. We're really not. We're not necessarily don't have the resources, but we don't have the mindset to think in the context of how do we make sure that everybody is taken care of? How do we make sure that we start to deal with crises of climate not as a turf war or politicize it, but how do we make it into something that we can rally around and rally our nation around. We just, here in the States, we simply don't have that kind of foundational understanding or belief system. That's why when all of this started happening and our response certainly to to the pandemic came about, it was not a surprise to people like me because I was writing about it a year ahead of time, just that we were just not ready. We have resources, but it's all about political will, and it's about a cultural will as well. If the culture doesn't see itself as a collective unit, it is impossible to rally that culture or that community into a bigger place. Again, as I mentioned, that's the foundation why we created UBR, because we started realizing that if we can't do it on a national scale, then we have to at least work community by community and see that as the primary champion on climate change. And that doesn't mean that the collective nation can't come along, but we are going to have to lead as communities and set the example. And then the rest of the nation comes along. And I want to remind everybody, in the United States, it works like this. We lay down what we want to do as a community. Our elected officials are to represent our ideas so that we can get it also done on a national scale, not the other way around. I think that we're waiting for leadership from a national scale, and that's not going to happen. And this year or next year, no matter who's elected, simply because of the fact that the system is deeply compromised, and it becomes problematic for them to actually do representative work from you. There was this Princeton report that talked about how really a lot of our elected officials theoretically should be representing our ideas, because we are the leaders and they are our representatives to champion our ideas in front of a national audience. But it's not working that way. It's the other way around. We are actually looking to them to lead, and that's not their job. Their job is to represent us as leaders. So I want to emphasize that. So when we talk about climate change, we don't petition them to act better. We lead, and then they follow. Even if they're not, even if they're compromised, the bottom line is that we have to set the example. I can't emphasize. I'll just run through these quick 7 points, and then I'd like to toss it back to Dr. Ellis. These are 7 points that are brought out in the book that You and the New Normal. Climate crisis is really a crisis of opportunity. We have yet to see this as an opportunity to create a regenerative society, that is, to a reimagined society. Understand that whatever we're facing right now is not something that occurred in a vacuum over the past few years or anything. Climate crisis has been in play for decades. It has been going on for some time. So that means whatever systems that we have in place right now have contributed to this over an extended period of time. So if we're really talking about dealing with climate crisis, it can't be, let's put a Band-Aid on this. We have to talk about what got us here in the first place. And as Albert Einstein said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, the mind that got you here will not be the mind that will get you out. So if we're waiting for the same systems to somehow come up with solutions around climate crisis, I think we're mistaken. I think the most important thing is that we have to look at this as an opportunity to reimagine how things work. That requires more work from us and requires us to dig deeper than doing our bit, our part. It now requires us to think, what got us here in the first place? Because if those things are not cleaned up or changed or transformed, trust me, whatever actions that we're doing right now will only be repeated year after year after year. Second point is that normal is status quo. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about how they want to talk about going back to the status quo, or let's get back to normal. But again, normal basically would talk about maintaining the very tools that got us here in the first place. But the new normal is a new way forward. It's a new way of thinking. What would be a normal that would affirm people's dignity, quality of life, uh, our deeper relationship with the planet, so that we don't do these terrible things to it that brought us to this point in the first place? That's what a new normal would look like. So be careful when you're hearing people talk about, let's get back to normal, because in many ways they're talking about, let's get back and do the same thing that got us here in the first place. Number three, a lot of people won't like it when you talk about a new normal, because quite frankly, they're doing quite well. And as the stock market and such would tell you, that there are a good portion of people in the United States that are doing quite well under these circumstances in the face of climate crisis. So they're not necessarily motivated to do anything more than what we're doing right now. So they won't like it. There's just going to be a lot of pushback. And as you all probably experienced, it's just going to be that way. And they have the ear and the pocket of our politicians. So that's why I say it's going to be really difficult to get our representatives in Washington to do federal action. So we have to do it on a local basis, because the people who are benefiting the most from this situation have the most amount of money to contribute to their campaigns. So it's just one of those things. As I mentioned before, our system is deeply compromised. People don't like to say that out loud, but it is. Number four, all things are tied together. A lot of times we, in the climate crisis conversation, want to talk about this in a silo. We want to talk about environmentalism and these kinds of things, what's happening with the planet in a silo. But as we're seeing now, all of them, climate crisis, COVID-19, systemic racism, misogyny, income inequality, all of those things are all tied to the same source. Again, that's usually a conversation we don't have out loud, but it is that conversation that must be taken now, because my suspicion is that once you start to deal with climate crisis, you start to see the other aspects of what's happened in this wave. So we cannot talk about these conversations in a silo. We must now tie them together. It makes it bigger and it looks more daunting, but I would submit just the opposite. The reality is that they are all tied together. So it makes a lot of the things a lot more easier if we look at them in aggregate as opposed to in a silo. Number five, this is an inevitable outcome of our belief system. If we don't believe that we have a relationship with the planet, we tend to do things against the environment, other species, other human beings, against all kinds of things, because our belief system says, you are not me, so I can do things to you I would never do to myself. That is a reality that is being played out in climate crisis. Why else would other people look at the planet and say, oh, it's okay for us to do these terrible things? Or, yes, we have a report that says these terrible things are going to happen, but we don't care because we're making too much money. Anytime that happens, it means there's a foundational belief system that says some get, most don't. And then our planet becomes a crisis. So if we don't deal with that too, we will be facing this challenge year after year after year. It is about belief systems. Number six, we need a new belief system, and to pair it with an infrastructure that reflects our belief system. I happen to believe in one called Ubuntu. It is a Southern African concept that says that we are all connected. Once, not just people, but all things are connected. So once you develop a belief system that reflects that, you create the infrastructure that reflects, if we're all connected and all of us have value and meaning, then we need to create systems and ideas and solutions that means everybody is positively affected when we do this. Not just some, not just the United States, not just our community, but you start thinking about it differently. That used to be kind of stuck in the kumbaya, feel good kind of conversation. But what I'm suggesting, based around everything that I've seen, at least to date, that a belief system based around connectedness is much more robust, much more agile, and much more forward thinking than the one that says some get and most don't. So we're really talking about how do we create a more efficient and effective system? And that starts with our beliefs. If our beliefs are still tied to, an incredibly ineffective and incredibly destructive system, then that's on us. That means that we haven't thought big enough and powerfully enough in order to create something better. And I suggest that we can create something better. Again, my personal belief is just the fact that all things are connected and infrastructure should be created around that belief. And then finally, we really need a level of visionary leadership, that the leadership now simply isn't big enough. It doesn't have the vision enough. Some of you may have seen the old movie Jaws years ago. There was a guy, Brody, he was out and he was throwing chum on the water, and Quinn was driving the boat, and they threw some chum on the water to attract the sharks. They're trying to track this giant shark down and, kill it so it doesn't do terrible things. So he's throwing chum on the water, and this giant shark comes up, bigger than anything Quinn or Brody thought. And so it goes back down in the water, and Brody backs up. He backs into Quinn, and he says, "Looks like we need a bigger boat." And that's exactly where we are right now. The level of crises of scale are so huge that when we siloed things, it seemed like they were manageable, but now we need a bigger boat, one that is big enough to be able to manage this level of crises and this level of solutions. So it cannot be solution for you and then solution for me. It must be solution at scale. So we need a bigger boat. And that comes from visionary leadership, a leadership that is big enough to see the big picture. And we don't have that right now, but definitely we should be leading in that, in the climate crisis championship push. So that's all I had to share. I would love for to talk with all of you in your communities about what we're doing in Denver. We're actually creating in partnership with the city of Denver, a kind of a private equity fund so that we start to build small businesses around resilience and around changing our lifestyle. We know that there are a lot of companies doing a lot of technology stuff, but we also recognize that our lifestyles are going to have to change, transform into something greater. So that's what our private equity fund is being based on.
That's really wonderful, Chad. Thank you so much for sharing meaning and purpose with us in terms of our future. We have a lot of work to do. And I think that's what draws all of us together. And I was taught the Ubuntu principle also when I went to graduate school at Morgan State University in Baltimore. And it is an important principle that the Western world, we really don't know about Ubuntu and how important that unifying work is. And when I see you, I see myself and our connection. And so, how do you think we can bring that principle to more to the forefront? I think it is our local efforts, but it's also our national efforts. It's our school systems, it's our civic organizations. And I think that when we are diverse, when we appreciate our diversity and make efforts just like today, getting together from all parts of the United States and different ethnic groups, we can all share our concerns, our mutual concerns, and our mutual aspirations for quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and we can work in our communities, as you're saying, and then allow our representatives to know that they have to to do what we want them to do.
Yeah.
But it's just so hard because I
Yeah.
know with my representatives, I do discuss these issues with them, but they seem like they just don't want to listen. And as you said, they don't really want a new normal. So it's very difficult, and but the work must be done.
Yeah.
And I think it is just this what we're saying today is that reality. We have to confront one another with the truth. And I'm glad that we have artists who are coming out. Even that's an area where we're really talking heart issues. So
Mhm.
it's important that we include everyone. It's not just the academics. And I think
Mhm.
that's a problem too. And we're, exalting people um, that they're, and I mean, a lot of the academics now, they really see that they have to really to be out in the streets. I mean, we know of some well-renowned scientists that now have been protesting because they don't know what else to do. It seems like no
Yeah.
one's reading all the reports, and
Yeah.
so they're doing things that we're not proud of in our country. We've had so many misdirected paths
Mm.
that's brought us to where we are today.
Yeah. I want to say this to that too, that my hope and desire is that people don't get discouraged because of the fact that we have a substantial populace in this country that does not care, or they're just not putting in the work. So that means those of us who are aware of the climate crisis at our doorstep, we must do the work for us and for them.